All right, good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to, well, you've been already welcome to the Teaching TLA Day, but now we are going to have Auxin as part of the TLA session. So before we start, I'm welcoming you here in front of me. So thank you for spending your time with us this morning. But I also need to welcome our audience online, and I hope they can hear and see me. Hello, audience online. But I'd also like to send a special welcome to our industry guests, as well as our colleagues from our neighboring university, the University of the Western Cape. So I know that some of them are here in the venue today, and others are joining us online. So welcome to you. My name is Simbongile Ndwasa, and I'm an advisor at the Center for Teaching and Learning here at Stellenbosch University. Now, a bit about Auxins is Auxins are monthly lunchtime discussions on teaching learning assessment that we often have here at SU. So this is where the passionate people in the room, and obviously you online, come together to share on their innovative teaching learning assessment in their classrooms, obviously being underpinned by theory and in your practice, and that's what most of this conversation is going to be focused on. So the session will take about 35 minutes, where we're going to have our distinguished guests, whom I'm going to introduce in a second. And then we will have about 20 minutes of discussion, where you in the room will get to engage our participants, and we will also give an opportunity for our audience online. But there's a bit of a challenge with my audience online. We will unfortunately not be able to hear you in the room. So if I can ask you to please write down your questions or points on the chats function, and then I'll be sure to read those to our panel. Yes, so now it's time for me to multitask and find my, okay, hold on a sec, I'm trying to find my introduction to my speakers. You know, technology, let me try to use both hands, sorry. I had this open on my phone, but obviously it chose to disappear. There we go. All right, sorry about that. So we're going to start by introducing our first speaker, who is part of our family. That is Dr. Hanelie Adendorff. Dr. Hanelie Adendorff is a senior advisor in the Center for Teaching and Learning. She has a PhD in chemistry, but has been working in professional development since 2002. Her career and professional development started with an interest in blended learning, but she has since included work in the areas of assessment, facilitation of collaborative learning, science education, and more recently, the decolonization of science curriculum. So Hanelie currently works as an advisor in the Faculty of Science, where she works with the Vice Dean Teaching and Learning to enhance the status of teaching in the faculty. So she is right here in her green dress. This is Dr. Hanelie, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
And then we have our visitor, Professor Karin Joy Koopman. Prof. Karin Koopman is an associate professor in commerce education in the Department of Educational Studies in the Faculty of Education at the University of the Western Cape. She holds 5 research awards and a Faculty Excellence in Teaching award, and has co-authored 2 books and co-edited 2 further books in the field of curriculum studies and phenomenology. Her scholarly work draws on the work of Heidegger. This one has been very difficult to pronounce. The wine.
Merlot.
Yes. Merleau-Ponty, and the reconceptualist curriculum tradition of William Pinar and Ted Aoki. Yes, I know this has been difficult, colleagues. All right, and then last but not least, we have Professor Oscar Koopman, who is our SU's Acting Vice Dean of Teaching and Learning at the Faculty of Education. He is also an Associate Professor in Curriculum Studies in the Faculty of Education at Stellenbosch University. He holds a C2 NRF rating and has authored 6 books in the field of curriculum studies, phenomenology, and science education. His scholarly work draws on continental philosophy, particularly in the work of Husserl, Heidegger, Husserl, Heidegger, and Merleau-Ponty, as well as the reconceptualist curriculum tradition of William Pinar and Ted Aoki. Thank you so much. All right, colleagues, let's hand over to our keynote.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see if it's working. Can everybody hear me? Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for coming, as Sim has already said, and thank you, Sim, for that lovely introduction. So I'm going to start this right away with the following. I've been sitting with an uncomfortable idea, and that is that we at universities are creating or sending out from here in our graduates human deepfakes. Not because of AI, but because of something that went wrong in the university a long time ago, in which AI is just showing up for us more so than ever before. And I was really excited when I came across the work, a series, well, there's more work than that, but a series of pieces in University World News by both Professor Oscar Koopman and Professor Karin Koopman, who I'll call Oscar and Karin from here on. I hope that's okay. So this talk will be based in part on what they've written, for those of you that have read it. For those of you that have not read it, it might be a good idea to go and find that, as well as on a chapter that I co-authored with my colleagues Nicoline Herman and Deline Hubert, in which we introduce this idea of the human deepfake. Although we use different language and different philosophers, if their names are difficult, Sim, imagine reading their work. I think when I started reading your work, it felt very close to what was bothering me. So what I want to do this afternoon is invite all of you in the audience here into a conversation or into thinking aloud with the three of us. We're not here to resolve the issue of AI in education or even what the university is for, which is really the theme of what we'll be talking about this afternoon, but just to start thinking or to share some of the thoughts. So I'm going to start with you, Karin, and ask you, maybe can you tell us how the series that you wrote in University World News came about?
Yes, thanks, Hanelie. First, I just have to greet everyone. So good afternoon to all of you. Yeah. Making me very nervous. This is the first time I'm doing something like this. Anyway, so to answer your question. So a few months ago, actually just about around February, Oscar and I sat down to write what we thought was just a straightforward response to a colleague's article about AI and assessment in higher education, obviously. The title of that article was, or is, Why Securing Credible Learning in an Era of AI is Not Enough. But what we ended up writing surprised both of us, because halfway through this article we realized it's not actually about AI at all. We were writing about something that was troubling us, and as you obviously heard now, a few other people as well. Something that we've been thinking about, in our classrooms, what is happening in our classrooms. I'm going to actually stick to this because otherwise I can drift. So what's happening in our classrooms, in our research, and in our conversations and arguments. At home, I had to bring that in. At home, without ever finding the right words for it. We discovered that we were actually just writing about students who had disappeared. Not physically, they were sitting in front of us, but somewhere between the learning outcome and our rubric and the assessment brief and the submission of this article, the person had disappeared. What arrived in our hands, this is now the answer, the script, was technically correct, properly formatted, but completely empty of anyone actually being there. So that's the background.
And I shouldn't switch this thing off in between. There we go. It's back on. Karin, thank you so much for that. I think what I see across your work and what I hear and what you are saying is resonates with me. Firstly, that understanding that we're not really writing about AI now. We're writing about something else, which that's just showing up to us. But also that this is moving beyond what the student knows. It's moving into what's happening to our students, who they are becoming when they come to the university. And Oscar, I think that's where your philosophical handling of this can really help us make sense of what it is, what we are seeing.
Yeah, thank you, Hanelie. Good afternoon, everyone. And I also just like to extend a big thank you to the Center for Teaching and Learning,
Yeah.
who invited us to come and talk about our work. It's really a great honor to be here and to share, our work. Before I jump into the question that Hanelie just asked, I want to draw the focus to what Karin just talked about. That disappearing student is the one aspect of the work. And then there's the other aspect of the work which has to do with a thinking student. I was sitting a week ago in Saldanha Bay, where I was invited by our students over a meal. The Deputy Minister of, I think, Trade and Industry and Business and Competition was also there. And what really emerged after some other conversations was the issue of AI again. And I told the students when I got there, I said, look here, I'm not here as a vice dean. I'm just here to witness and to affirm whatever it is that's going to happen here. And I chose the furthest seat away from the center of the table. And while the conversation, was going on and so forth, and the minister didn't put me on the spot by asking me. So I'd like to hear from the Vice Dean Teaching and Learning here in the room, because that's how they introduced me, about what are his views about AI. And I said to her the following words, which is where I actually want to tie it to Karin's. I said to her, I'm not against AI. In fact, I'm all for AI. However, the big question becomes, are we producing a disappearing student? In other words, are we perpetuating that? Or are we using AI to produce a thinking student? Now, let me just give you the difference between the two. I studied at the University of the Western Cape. Most of my qualifications was done there. And then I came to Stellenbosch University, where I did my PhD here. And up until my master's qualification, I was actually very much absent from the work that I was doing. For example, in science, I studied pure and applied sciences as my undergraduate qualification. So after a long holiday, when I came back to campus, then I've forgotten everything that I've learned in the first semester. Not everything, but about 60% or 50%, right, of the work. And so I went through the university up until I got to Stellenbosch. Now, this is where the transformation within me actually took place. Because for the first time, I started to ask myself questions about of what value is the knowledge to me? In what ways are the knowledge transforming my thinking about myself and my thinking about the world out there, especially in the context of the rich history of our country? And so all of those questions, started within me, but it was only because I was deeply engaged in conversations with scholars like Husserl and Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, who, in fact, when you read their work, the main idea when you start to read it is to learn something, right? So that you can use it in your doctoral work. But eventually, I discovered, instead of using it in my work first, it actually taught me to look inward. And those were the deeper philosophical questions about being, about existence, about caring, about kindness, about humanity, and all of those elements that goes with it. And so, that in a way really shaped the way I started to think about the world. Now, that means at that point alone did I start to become a thinking student. Shifting away from the performing student who could answer any question in a test perfectly, who could do very well when questions about all of these courses that I've been introduced to. But at the end of the day, it really didn't affect or change the way I think about the world. I just kept on thinking about the world in the same manner as I used to, except I could cite and I could, whatever the case may be. So that's the first thing. So what Karin was saying about the disappearing students brings us to work that we've actually started to write already in 2020 during COVID. We've actually published 2 papers. The one was about the rise of the university without classrooms. That's what we saw already happening. That was in 2020 when AI didn't exist yet. And then the second paper we published was the dangers, the dark side of online learning, which is more the technical, aspects, because all of a sudden we all now were just dumped into this whole new framework of having to teach, over on a learning management platform and so forth. And when I spoke to a lot of colleagues, I could hear them saying, this just doesn't work for me. I want to feel my students. I want to see my students. When I speak, it looks like I'm talking to a machine here, and there's no response on the other hand. And so that's when we stumbled across the work of Heidegger in his 1954 paper titled The Question Concerning Technology. And Heidegger used the word enframing from the German Das Gestell, which means, in fact, what Heidegger is saying technology has the capacity to reorientate ourselves to the world. In other words, it creates a new epistemic logic about how we think about the world. Heidegger also, in fact, he uses the word, he says that there will come a time when the human being will be seen as nothing but a fungible resource, a standing reserve that awaits optimization. And so when we came across that work, we realized that this particular element that Heidegger is talking about here is about, you know, the nature of the standing reserve, right? Which is about the student, which is about us, and it's about the deployability of the student and the optimizability of the student for a particular purpose. And all of that is determined by a system that's much bigger than us. And we are just sort of in this mold, you know, in the system. And so there's little, what makes it significant is that there's nothing or very little in the system about the student becoming themselves. And it's more about this performativity, this culture of performativity. And now I want to hear those words in the context of our institution, right? What we use, the language we use back then and now, it's not that much very different. It's about issues relating to graduate attributes, learning outcomes, and all of those things that we see. It's about throughput rates. It's about almost like, you know, there's this successive production system in which we find ourselves. And so, and don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing wrong with outcomes. It's important. You know, we need to have outcomes in our programs. It's important that we have graduate attributes in our programs. But the challenge becomes if that's the only language that we focus on in terms of the becoming of the student in relation to the profession that we're preparing the student for, then it becomes a challenge. And here I want you to think about a medical doctor that we train here, right? That student can get high marks, can perform very well in our tests and in exams, but at the end of the day, there's the finer, smaller aspects about humanity. Can that student sit with a dying patient and, you know, say the right words to that specific patient? Can that student, when there's, you know, something that requires some deeper form of humanity, can that student connect with that person? And that is one of the concerns that I have in relation to the system that we operate in, especially when we look at it through the lens of all of those beautiful, wonderful aspects and policies of our institutions across the country. And then there's also the work of the Hungarian scholar Georgi Lukács, who talks about reification, or what Erich Fromm calls thingification, where we as human beings are reduced to objects because we are always functioning in a particular way, because we are transformed into measurable things. And that is, that measurableness comes with fixed and exchangeable properties. And so if you put enframing and reification together, they are not merely philosophical concepts. They are the operating logic of the contemporary university. And the performing student that Karin was just talking about right now, as this rational product of the logic. And lastly, the other scholar's work that we also use is the work of Martin Heidegger, who forewarned us already close to 100 years ago when he saw Europe lying in ruins, and he saw the dangers, Husserl, where he saw the dangers of what natural science has done to the European civilization. And he realized we have to shift away from the focus on natural science, and we need to start to think about something philosophically far more important, which has to do with the Levensfeld, the lived world. And that's where we bring in the human subjectivity and all those other aspects related to our existence as human beings.
Thank you, Oscar. So much there that I almost feel I want to say we should just sit with it for a moment and think about everything that you said. I also found Heidegger to be very illuminating when I came across enframing the first time. And that's where our idea of the human deepfake was born from. It's exactly this, or it relates to the same thing of the thinking versus the performing student. I would be surprised if most of us in the room could not relate to this idea of everything being counted. I think it's, they sometimes give this to Einstein, I don't know who said it, but it only counts if it can be counted, sort of the system we are in. But these things, the thinking student, the performing student, the disappearing student, Karin, I think begs questions about our curriculum and what we think a curriculum is about and what it is for. And I know you have ideas on that front.
Yes, so I think earlier on you did, it was some that said I concentrate on, in my PhD, on Pioneer, William Pioneer and TLA. So I'm going to answer that question with Pioneer's views about what curriculum is. So he actually terms, or he calls it Correra. Oh, I must pronounce it properly. Correra. And he says, Correra, I used to say Corre. Last night I discovered it's Correra. So Correra is not a noun. It doesn't mean to run a course. Here's a document, and this is what you now do with it. It is actually a verb, a doing word. It means to run the course. And he brings in this career, in this running of the course, embodiment, and he talks about this student that must be present in the running. He must do something, so he must be there to do something. So, and he calls this autobiographical experience. I think I need to explain that autobiographical experience first. So there are 4 steps connected to this autobiographical method. The first one is the regressive step or stage. And this is where the student thinks about his past, you know, who am I, things that also affected him during his life, his childhood perhaps, was he wounded in some way? Even the positive things also make us who we are. Not even the positive things make us who we contribute towards that as well. It's not just bad things that happen to us. So the regressive phase is where the student thinks about who am I, you know. And then there's the progressive stage. And this is the phase or the stage where the student imagines who he could be, who he can become, he or she can become. And then there's another phase. I call it a phase or a stage. And he calls this the analytical register. And this is where the student grapples with the past. Who am I? And who am I? Who can I be? The future. So it's this tension between past and future. Who am I and who I can become? And this synthetically takes the student brings her into the present. And here is where the teacher's work is very important. It requires the teacher to, I call it here, be deeply involved with what's happening in the classroom. I'm not going to digress. I'm going to stick to this. Anyway, so what was I saying about the deeply involved in it? I was going to give an example, but I'm not going to. So anyway, so all these 4 steps, yes, they come together, and it is the teacher's not job, responsibility to bring the student into the present. Okay, so now what happens? And this is different to enframing. There isn't a standard outcome. You're not going to like what I'm saying now, but we are not all, I call it zombies. When I think of that word, enframing and reification, then I think of a zombie. They just want us to produce. We must just work, we must just work, we must just work. Like those movies, you know, work, work, work to produce a product and money for the company. But anyway, so there's no standard outcome. We must think. So that's Pioneer. So what are the implications of AI? So when a student produces a well-articulated essay, then they've executed the curriculum perfectly. That's what I said, in framing. However, there's no trace of Korea, there's no trace of running that course. Okay? No, there was no interrogation with the past. This is now in framing. No future was envisioned, and no present was experienced. Very sad. Therefore, when we talk about, and Oscar will do this later, about self-authentication, it's very similar to what Pioneer calls career. Yeah, so I think I'm going to end there. Unless you want me to go on with IOP, but you can do IOP.
Okay.
Before you continue, I just have to say, what you just helped us do, I think, is we at Stellenbosch University talk about learning that transforms. It sits in all our policy documents, but that's learning that transforms, isn't it? Yeah. That's giving language, that's giving a description to something that we often struggle to describe.
Yeah. In fact, I'd like to say this. When we wrote that second paper on how Pioneer and IOKI will help us understand, you know, this whole new world of AI. When we finished the paper, we actually sent it to William Pioneer, who's 78 years old now, and I thought he will send it back to me overnight, you know, because it's such a short essay. It's about 1,400 words, and 4 days later, I didn't hear from Bill, and so I wrote to Bill. I said, Bill, no rush, but can you please update me, you know? And Bill said to me, Oscar, when you are 78 years old, remember, you suffer from diminished energy. But anyway, he was so kind to proofread the paper, you know, and to also give us a valuable insight into it, because Bill and Ted were actually very, very close. I mean, Ted was Bill's mentor, and a lot of Bill's ideas come from a particular perspective that speaks to the world of curriculum seen through the lens of Ted IOKI. And in fact, when we wrote about indwelling, you can see a lot of the traces of Pioneer's work also in there. I mean, the ideas that Pioneer actually drew from Ted. But Ted IOKI does something very powerful. He invoked this notion of metonymic doubling, which has to do with curriculum, has got two lenses. The one is curriculum is planned, which is the outcomes, the sequencing of our lectures and so forth. The policy as prescribed by the policy, and then you've got curriculum as lived, which is the aspects that the real world in which we find ourselves becomes more pronounced in the curriculum. And he says it's very difficult to sort of straddle these two roads. But Aoki is more famously known for a particular phrase, and it comes out, if you read his work, and it comes out in a lot of the scholars who's now writing books about Aoki. It's this notion called the lingering on the bridge. In fact, where he worked, they have, at UBC, University of British Columbia, there's actually a memorial bridge that they've built in honor of Aoki. And what that bridge represents is what Karin was just talking about now. It's this issue of that tension, right? The relationship between the teacher and the student. It's the student's, it's the teacher's role, he says, or he argues, to take that student through your program, through your module, onto that bridge daily. And on that bridge, there's a deep sense of conviction. There's a deep sense of asking questions about who am I, why am I here, who am I becoming. There's the historical element, it's that tension that's happening on that bridge. And Aoki says, if we cannot convince the student through our relationship and engagement with him or her, to cross that bridge to the other side, when I mean, from the other side is the historical, the past, and the future, where you're moving that student towards understanding the world differently in relation to how the work is sort of speaking through. He says, if you don't get it right today, it's fine. Come back tomorrow again. And tomorrow, there's the site of struggle again between the information, the content, and all of those things that we teach our students. And what AI has done, if you read Aoki very well, it has actually colonized the curriculum as planned. Because the student can now, submit a polished assignment, brilliantly articulated, but there's no struggle in there. There's no authenticity in there. There's no presence in there. And this is where we actually talked about, this notion of the artist. When the Louvre, the curators of the Louvre actually, evaluate a painting like a Rembrandt painting, they don't look at how perfect this painting is. They look at the presence of the author in the painting, the struggles that the artist wrestled with. How many times he painted over that very same surface. And so that's that presence that Aoki and Paine actually helps us to understand about, how our curricula should actually address the concerns related to AI. Because AI will take away what Maxine Green calls that awakeness, that being awake in that space where you teach them. Because that awakeness is what actually helps that student connect to the world in which you work. And now I think I've drifted a little bit from your question, Hanelie.
I can't remember the question anymore. I
Yeah.
It was actually so mine about the curriculum.
Yeah. Also, it's so
it all ties in Paine and Aoki and how they see the curriculum.
That's right. It's still the curriculum, and the curriculum, I think you call it a self-authentication, which you've explained. And I've realized as I'm here and Sim is standing that we need much more than an hour to have this conversation if we want more people, Sim standing, because we want to give the audience a chance. There's a lot more I want to touch on. I think you do a brilliant task in the fourth piece where you challenge us to hold together the urgency and the importance of a qualification for students in Africa with achieving this, that it's not one or the other, it's both. And I want to end just with something that you write in that last piece, which is that knowledge once had a soul, and it was the task of the university to protect that. That's my paraphrase. The first is yours. That really hit me. It speaks to, I think, what is in my mind as well. And as you in the audience might know now, we've not really resolved anything, but I think we have to have far more of these conversations. And I'll thank you in a moment, but let's open to the audience and just hear. Oh yeah, maybe there's just one thing. I'm going to give Karin a moment to share a key concept that because I've now skipped over about 10 of my questions. that comes through their work before we open for questions, and that's about pedagogical courage, because I think that is key, and it is key what we as an academic in a classroom, what's this asking of us?
Yes, so I'm sure that is what many people sitting here are thinking, you know, what must we do? That's the question, you know, it comes back to the practical. It's fine, all this theory, who said what long ago, but what must we now do? So we call that pedagogical courage. Yes, the courage to do something, and because we're talking about the curriculum, it's about pedagogy. So it's about teaching, okay. Pedagogical courage, not the courage of the institution's grand gestures to change things. No, the courage that we have to practice there, do in class, okay? Doing, we have to do something. Let me see, I've drifted again. Pedagogical, oh yeah, it's the practice, I said that. It means making a decision about an assessment task, a seminar structure, a way of responding to student work that is orientated by a different logic than the one the institution rewards. Courage, people, but you won't get hired, eh? You just do things differently in your class, okay? There's still the outcomes, there's still that outcome, but the way we reach that outcome is with more, what can I call it?
Determination to change.
Determination and bringing the student into the present, what I was talking about earlier on, okay? It means acting on the new framework before the institutional conditions have fully caught up with it. They're always a little bit behind. Huh? In my own commerce education classes, this means asking student teachers not just what is the correct accounting procedure, you know, or explain the correct way that you are going to explain something to the children in your class one day. No, it can be how did you feel when you were explaining that concept or whatever it is, method, to the children. So that example is again about making the student think about his presence in that explanation of that concept. What did they learn about themselves? And this is not it can't really be captured in a rubric. Yeah, and that is the pedagogical courage. I thought it was important just to bring that in.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sure I thought I just figured it out, and then I didn't. Thank you for that. I think we'll open for questions, which Sim will handle now.
Yes, but before that, can we please give them a round of applause? Wow, thank you so much, Hanelie, Prof. Oscar, and Karin Koopman. So one line that stood out very much for me was, have our students disappeared between the so-called managerialistic, bureaucratic, and performative notions that university has become. And I'm sorry to end such an intriguing conversation, but one of my key performance areas is to make sure that this discussion ends in time. So I'm not seeing
proceeds on
anyone.
time.
Colleagues online, you can start typing your questions, but I'm going to now roll the mic around to get some questions, and Prof is first.
Hi, I'm Debbie Lay from Mechanical Engineering. So, I mean, everything that you say, I desperately want to do, But when I started teaching in 2007, my class was about 120 students, and now I'm at 480. And there is not space for 480 students on that bridge. But I do feel that ethically, I feel that if I compare the space that I was given as a student back in the 1990s to engage with my lecturers and to have these conversations that linked my past to my future, I think that we are failing so many of our students. Those students are disappearing. And I feel that it is unethical for us to ask students to pay what they pay to come to higher education when we're not offering them that space to grow as a young person. But on the other side, I understand that to run a university, if you have to have mentorship spaces for those students who just don't have the staff or the money to do that. So there can be pedagogical courage to try and do what you can in these big classes. But we need lots more spaces to come up with ideas of how we can possibly manage this gap. And I don't have any solutions, but I don't know if you have any ideas or, yeah, what we can do there with the class sizes.
You said 480? That's big. And look, this is exactly, I don't have a direct answer for you on that, but I'm glad you're actually raising it, because in a way you are also refining our thinking, around the practicality of our arguments in relation to how things have changed over the last few decades. And, it might even get worse, that you might end up with, if you are sitting now with a class of 480, I don't know how long it took you to get there, you might next year sit with 600-700 students. But I think that's exactly what we talk about when we use the word courage. It comes at a cost. It means that when you walk into that lecture theater on a Monday or on a Tuesday or on a Wednesday, and you have prepared a particular concept or topic for your students, it means that as an academic, who want to really bring about that change and who wants to practice pioneers curere, it means that from the onset, there has to be a plan in terms of how will the topic and the work that I'm going to teach these students now, how is it going to impact them? And I think that, I'm not an engineer, so I can't give you practical, examples of that. But for example, I teach a class of 250 curriculum study students, and I'm preparing them to be future teachers. And so I have to think about what the world is going to look like in the next 5 or 10 years. And I have to develop concepts and ideas that will bring their personal lived world experiences into the classroom, that will connect with the actual content in order for them to reimagine that future that Pioneer is talking about. But I know it's easier for me to say that, but at the end of the day, it starts with a simple question. How am I going to change the worlds of these students this afternoon? And the planning and the ideas will have to somehow surface from your experiences, drawing from your past, your future, the tension within, and then to move forward in terms of that, what Pioneer talks about, that syntactical register of reimagining a space that's liberating and enlightening to your learners. Maybe you want to go on.
All right, thank you, Prof. I think there's also the question that Jean is asking online is related to what Prof. Debbie was asking, because she says, how do we align AI, the pace at which students are expected to progress through their degrees, with lecturers who are overloaded and maintaining relationships with students?
Do you want to take a stab at it? Oh.
I will.
Okay.
I'm not going to answer it, but and now I forgot what I wanted to say, but I just, I think this really, the one thing, this is what I wanted to say, what we should be careful of, what we should not do is to think that the solution for the future is AI. We can now personalize learning through AI, we can now make ourselves more efficient through AI. As you said earlier, I'm not against it. I'm not a super user, but I'm a user, but I think we should stay really cognizant of staying human in this space. I think Oscar already answered to some degree Jean's question. The same holds back to us as academics and staff at the university. That's a whole other tricky conversation that we are just starting to have. We're all inframed in the system, not just the students. So we acknowledge Jean's question, but we can't resolve it all this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Another hand.
I'm commenting as a thinking out loud with, so there's maybe not a question, but perhaps there is a question. And if that's not, if anyone else has a question, I wanted to give the mic over. But I think, so thinking with these philosophical ideas, I want to enter a few names and concepts onto the table. So Barnett, for instance, in his book, I always share this wherever I can, On a Will to Learn, is one of those exceptional pieces that gets us to imagining something different while working within the current constraints of our assessment culture. And so I think there is something to be said about thinking about our assessment culture as we think about what it means to be human, and do we have the space and time and pacing for our students to become that. I found the metaphor of the students on the bridge, all 480 of them. There's a concept that I think was COVID 2018 when MOOCs started coming onto the fore. He spoke about the community as curriculum. And I found that to be really helpful to think with, because in your class, not all 480 of them have to be on the bridge at the same time. Some of them actually need a higher bridge because they've already dealt with some of these questions that the colleagues have brought to the table. So how do we redesign learning where the community is the center of the curriculum? And AI, unfortunately, is a part of that community right now. So those are just two concepts that I thought might be helpful in us thinking with these other philosophers. I'm Talisha from the Fact of Education Library.
I think it's a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Delisha. I think that's really, really useful. And I know you draw on Barnett in your final piece in not your final piece, in your latest piece in University World News as well. I think it is, the more we share these people who can help us think together through these problems, hopefully the further we will get.
Andy, can I just add something? Look, thank you, Delisha. This thought just dropped on me. It's in our fourth piece, I think. Could have it wrong. Could be in the third piece too. But in 2018, we attended the Philosophy and Theory of Higher Education Society conference that was hosted by Middlesex University in London. And what we found very profound about that conference was that they only invited about 50 people to the conference, 50 papers. And it was people from all over the world, from Asia, Europe, Africa, South America, Russia, from everywhere. And the focus of that conference was on the student, just the student, to think about, who is the student? What is it? Are we doing justice to the student? How do we break this, this mold we find ourselves in to produce something different? How do we think differently so that people understand who the student is? The second conference the following year was in Belgium, where we presented a paper on it. Karin went to Belgium. I couldn't go. And I think the focus of that conference was on, can you remember? Reclaiming study practices. And, you know, and that signaled to me that something has been lost immediately, right? So things that we often take for granted, like just a simple thing like, what is studying? What does it mean? And we were amazed at the deep philosophical, you know, ideas that emerged from that conference. And then in 2020, the conference shifted to the university under siege. And it couldn't happen because then COVID-19 happened. And so I think it was shifted to 2022 then. So because COVID shut the whole world down. But what is very profound about it is that, you know, that's what we need as a community, you know, to start thinking about the future, to start reimagining this future, to start to reinvent ourselves through these conferences and conversations that we're having. For example, this particular conversation we're having here now is the start of a conversation like that. You know, how do we overcome, not overcome, but how do we deal with this AI as a disruptor? And I think until we get to a point where we actually, in some way or the other, get the student to think about AI as something powerful, but I can never outsource my thinking to AI. And that is, I think, one of the key concerns around the use of AI in our work. And I think it will be even a bonus if they can say to themselves as they develop that, it's pointless for me to even go to AI.
I think I got the nod from Sim to say we're drawing it to a close, but I just wanted to make sure before Sim say what he needs to say that I get the opportunity to thank you both, Oscar and Karin, for coming out this afternoon, having this conversation. It is quite nerve-wracking to know this is live streamed, I'll have you know. But being so human in this space, it really is a privilege that you came, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I want to put this out as a teaser to all of you. If you like this, we're doing it again in November, is it November, at the SOTL conference, and we'll have a third person in the panel then. So we will continue this discussion again, but thank you, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Anya.
All right.
I've switched it off.
All right, and then it's my turn to thank you, Hanelie, for facilitating such an enticing discussion, and of course with the profs in the room. And I also want to thank my audience online who have participated. Thank you so much for your time. And of course, the people in the room. Yes, I think I've made it because it feels like I've always wanted to be a TV presenter. This is happening. All right. Unfortunately, to my colleagues online, we do not have food for you, but I think it's lunchtime for us in the room. Thank you so much. Claudia, do you want to say something?
Colleagues, just some admin. There's a phone at reception, so somebody clearly doesn't look at their cell phone all the time, which is great. But if anybody lost a phone, it's at reception. And then we're going to break now, and then it's for lunch. And then our afternoon sessions start at 2 o'clock. And if you have not registered, good news, you are welcome to attend, where we will continue this conversation through various very interesting lenses. So if you still want to join us this afternoon, you're welcome to do so. But enjoy lunch, colleagues. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Hanelie.